Alright, back to squares and square roots after those couple days of scientific notation ridiculousness. So, a square root, I don't know why there's no line there, but is a number that when multiplied by itself forms a given product. So the square root of 100 is 10 because 10 times 10 equals 100. The principal square root is the non-negative square root of a number, and a perfect square is a number that has integers as its square root, like the square root of 100 is 10. So, to find two square roots of, or find the two square roots of each number. Each square root has a positive and a negative, because if you multiply a negative times a negative, you get a positive. Okay, so the square root of 49 is 7. Oops, need my pen. Is 7 because 7 times 7 is 47. So 7 is a square root, since 7 times 7 is 49. And then they put the negative outside the square root. It's very important that the negative goes outside the square root and not underneath. Never put the negative underneath the square root. So we bring that negative over, and then again the square root of 49 is 7. Negative 7 is also a square root, since negative 7 times negative 7 equals 49, like I just told you. So the square root of 100, what times itself equals 100? Well, 10. 10 times 10 equals 100, so 10 is a square root. Then we put the negative outside the square root sign, bring it over, and then the square root of 100 is 10. So, because negative 10 times negative 10 equals positive 100, negative 10 is also a square root. 225. Now, the square root of 225, you have to think what times itself equals 225, which, if you don't know your square roots, you wouldn't just know probably off the top of your head that 15 is the square root of 225. But 15 times 15 is 225, so 15 is a square root. Then we put the negative outside of the square root sign, bring it over, and the square root of 225, we already know is 15, because negative 15 times negative 15 equals 225. Negative 15 is also a square root. And you can also just do those on your calculator. You type in 49, hit the square root sign, and it tells you that the answer is 7. It does not tell you the answer is negative 7 though as well. So if it's finding two square roots, you have to remember that it's both the positive and negative of what your calculator gives you. A square window has an area of 169 square inches. How wide is the window? Now remember, a square has equal sides, okay? And to find the area of a window, we do side squared, which is side times side, or length times width. So, in order to undo a square, we take the square root of it, okay? So, if the area is 169, we can put 169 in for the area equals side squared, and we can square root both of those because, again, to undo a square, you square root, and the square root of 169 is 13, and the square root of s squared is s. So find the square root of 169 to find the length of the window. Use the positive square root, because more than not, we're always going to just use the positive square root, unless it tells us to find two. A negative square root has no meaning, because a side cannot be negative 13 inches. It can only be positive 13 inches, because it's the length. So, 13 squared equals 169, so the square root of 169 is 13. So the window is 13 inches long, which is what we found here in a much more difficult way. But all we did was we took the formula for finding the area of a square. We put in 169 for the area because we knew that, and we took the square root of both sides. The square root of s squared is s, the square root of 169 is 13. So really, well, it might look way more difficult. It's really not if you think through it that way. So now we're going to simplify expressions. I love expressions with square roots in them. Don't judge. So, the first thing we're going to do is we are going to evaluate the square root. The square root is kind of like evaluating the exponent, okay? So, when we follow the order of operations, there are no exponents, but there are square roots. So the square root of 36 is 6, because 6 times 6 is 36, and we put that in parentheses, because if we have a number outside of the square root sign, we are going to be multiplying that number by whatever the square root of the number is under the square root sign. So then we're going to follow order of operations still and multiply. 3 times 6 is 18. 18 plus 7 is 25. Okay. B, the square root of 25/16 plus 3/4. We want to rewrite 25/16 as two separate numbers. We're going to leave the square root sign over each number, and they're going to stay where they are. So we're going to have the square root of 25 in the numerator over the square root of 16 in the denominator plus 3/4. Then we're going to evaluate the square roots. The square root of 25 is 5 over the square root of 16, which is 4. Now, they have like denominators, so our denominator stays the same, right? And we add our numerators, 5 plus 3, and we get 8 over 4, which simplifies down to just the whole number of 2. So, you check it out. It's super quick today. It should take you really no longer than like 15 seconds, especially if you use your calculator.